Welcome to another edition of the Corner Booth Podcast here from the Stoughton Deli. I'm Aaron Rand from CJD along with Bill Brownstein of the Montreal Gazette and our special guest today, André Pratte, author, journalist, former Canadian senator. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thanks for having me.
We're going to follow up on a piece you just wrote that's in the Montreal Gazette now, which concerns itself with the provincial government's decision to cut $570 million from the education budget, which a lot of people obviously wondered what the hell was going on for a government that says education and healthcare are its two big priorities. But then a bit of a flip-flop from Bernard Drinville, the education minister, saying, okay, I guess 150,000 signatures on a petition must have woken him up to some degree, and now some of that money is coming back. So initially your reaction just to that?
Well, I mean, I'm just flabbergasted as how easy it is for them to find $540 million. For a government that says that they're in dire financial straits, they need to cut everywhere. That's what they said in the last budget. And then suddenly, because people are angry, they find $540 million. I mean, I'm happy for the education system. This money is required. But still, they in a week, they found $540 million for the education system and $275 million for the third link, le troisième lien in Quebec City. So, I mean, my point in this piece that was published in the Gazette this morning was that we can't afford everything that we want from the government of Quebec as a society. I'm all for government intervention in many different fields, but we have to choose, taking into account our means to pay for all this. And so my point was, $570 million cuts is just the beginning. Further cuts will come. And this morning, my opinion is that even more drastic cuts will come because this $540 million that they just found, they need to take it somewhere else. Right?
But your whole point in your piece last week was including that 580 million whatever cut to education still put us in dire straits in terms of budgets and all the rest. And now it's kind of coming back, but how desperate are we here?
I think we're very desperate. I mean, if you look at the last budget tabled by the Minister of Finance, Éric Girard, what he forecasts for the next couple of years is increases in expenses around 1.5%. So that's below inflation. So if government expenses go up only 1%, that means that for the other 1, 2, or 3% that is inflation, they'll need to find that money somewhere, right? So either they'll cut it or they'll increase taxes.
Which governments never want to do.
Of course. Right. So they'll cut somewhere else. And even doing that, the budget says, and that's an official government document, that they're looking for $6 other billion that they don't know where they'll find, but they know that they'll need to find it if they want to balance a budget. So, and we're in an economy that is going pretty well, even though we have, threats, terrorist threats, and so on. The economy right now is going relatively well. So what will happen when the economy slows down, which will happen eventually? The government will be in even more serious financial difficulty. This is a structural problem that Quebecers as a society and governments of all political parties need to tackle. We cannot afford to have the most generous welfare state in North America. We're not just wealthy enough to afford that. So we have to make choices. And up to today, Quebecers as a society, again, we've refused to make these choices. We want to believe that there's some kind of magic solution. Money coming from Ottawa for some reason, or increase income taxes for the wealthy. But we just don't have enough wealthy people in Quebec to pay for that.
So what's the solution? Where do you cut?
Well, that's something that we have to decide as a society. We've decided that in every field of action, we should have the most generous social programs. So if healthcare and education are our priorities, and that's what Quebecers say, and that's what our political parties say, then put the money there and take money away from other services.
But how do you take money away? And you point out in your article, by the way, this is not unique to this particular government.
No.
We've been dealing with this for a long time in this province. You use the term welfare state, and then compares, and just as you just said now, there is no other North American jurisdiction as generous, if you will, as Quebec is, and that can't go on forever. You mentioned living within your means. Clearly, we're not and haven't been in a while. But how does that ever change politically? How do you win an election? You think back to when the Liberals lost under Philip Couillard. Why? Because of
Austerity.
only one word, austerity. And that was
Right.
enough to cost them an election. It's now going to be 8 years later. How does that change?
Yeah, and it's going to take a very strong mandate, and we know that sometimes, depending on circumstances, governments do receive a strong mandate to make changes. Mark Carney, right? He got a mandate because there were special circumstances, and he got a mandate to make, very important changes in Canada's economy and in the federal government. I think that's what it's going to take, and probably this will happen only if we find ourselves in an impossible financial situation, and where credit agencies and lenders tell us, listen, you have to change something. If not, this happened with Standard & Poor's. They downgraded Quebec, which will cost more money to the government
Right.
because of borrowing costs. So it's going to take some kind of crisis, I think, for people to realize that changes need to be
But
made.
a crisis of already having the largest deficit in Quebec history that we have right now, the analyst downgrade, what has to pile on top of that to make someone sit back and go, okay, this is not sustainable?
I think it will take something like, some lenders or credit agencies saying, like what happened in Canada when Jean Chrétien was in government, where, some agencies said Canada is becoming the New Mexico. And this sort of, struck a chord as something, hey, we're really in trouble here. I think that's what it's going to take. And it's going to take a government, a political party that has the courage to say, we need to make these changes. If not, the deficit will increase, and when the economy goes bad, the deficit will become even larger. Debt will be impossible to reimburse. We're going to be in serious trouble.
Well, we
If
are already.
you have a political party now in the PQ who doesn't seem to be talking about or want to talk about the economy at all. Separation, I don't want to say things have changed, but we had a poll out not that long ago showing that young Quebecers, for the first time in some time, have actually more of an interest now in that separation argument yet again. So how prevalent will that be with respect to focusing on one thing versus another when you're focusing on separation yet again in Quebec?
Well, that's, I'm very pessimistic about the next election, because I'm concerned that the next election will be about whether we want a new referendum on separation or not. And I don't think that's the most serious issue that we have to face right now is what kind of government do we want, and where do we want governments to focus their priorities, and not separation. I think separation, especially in today's context, geopolitical, economic, commercial context, separation makes absolutely no sense. Now, about this poll about young Quebecers, I'm very skeptical. I'm going to wait for another series of polls to show. I'm not saying there's not a trend. Maybe there's a trend. Maybe some young Quebecers, are now looking at separation as an option. But this Léger poll shows that in 1 month, support for separation amongst young Quebecers went from 35% to 48%. And nothing has happened. There's no event that could explain that. So it may be some statistical glitch. I'm not sure. I think it takes other polls to see whether it's a trend, and if it is a trend, how strong a trend it is.
Yes, but you look at the polls now, and even just after Pablo Rodriguez became Liberal leader, it seems that the difference in terms of the PQ and the Liberals is minuscule at this point. And people are thinking that in no time the Liberals could be dominant once again. So that doesn't necessarily dovetail with those findings of 48%.
Well, I think there's an opportunity for the provincial Liberals. As you know, I've been involved with the provincial Liberals for a couple of years. I think there's an opportunity, but there's a lot of work to be done. Many people have not forgotten the difficult years when Mr. Couillard was in power. I think they had no choice. They needed to take those measures that were called austerity, but that really created a budget surplus of $7 billion, of which has disappeared now. But anyways, people have not forgotten, or many people have not forgotten, that the Liberals have been in power for 15 years or so, and they think that provincial Liberals have not paid the price, or are not ready to come back to government. So we, as provincial Liberals, we have to make the case that, a referendum on separation is not a good option, and that we have to focus on Quebec's real problems in today's world, which is changing fast, and we need to adapt. So it's a challenge. It's not a given that the Liberals will win the next election. Far from it. We have a lot of work, and the leader, Pablo Rodriguez, has a lot of work in front of us.
So how important is what's going to happen in the by-election in Arthur-Basket, do you think, in terms of how that plays out? Is it significant or not?
I'm not sure. I mean, by-elections are, often send a wrong picture of reality, voters. And first of all, since this by-election is right smack in the middle of the summer, probably, participation rates will be quite low. And and people vote differently in by-elections often than they do in general elections. The polls show that the Parti québécois is ahead, slightly with the Conservatives. Nationally, the Parti québécois is ahead, but the Conservatives are far behind. So I think it's a specific context, right in the middle of summer, with the leader of the party, the Conservative Party, Mr. Duhem, a candidate. He will make a strong case for him being elected. And Arthur-Basket has never been a stronghold for the Liberals, far from it. So it's a by-election. I'm not sure it really means anything.
So we don't read too much into it.
No, I mean, if the CAQ lose badly, it's going to be another difficult news item for the party and for François Legault. But I think he'll stay on at least until the fall, see what he said that he would make changes to his cabinet. We'll see what happens, whether that has any impact on public opinion, and then he'll decide whether he stays on or not.
Okay. The Corner Booth podcast is brought to you in part by the Snowden Delicatessen, where we are. 75 years in business, the home of Montreal's greatest smoked meat, plus carnotzel, potato latkes, and the famous Snowden Deli party sandwiches. That's the Snowden Delicatessen.
You were involved writing policy, of course, for the Liberals. What's the connection now with, you're still an advisor, or you're still involved on that?
So I was chair of what is called the Policy Committee, which I left last May. But I'm still involved informally with the party, and I certainly support the party in their attempt to come back to government next year.
So your views vis-a-vis like welfare state and all the rest
are my views.
Yes,
they're not the Liberal Party.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
Do you share is there any resonance within the party to your views on this?
Well, I think so. It's certainly the Liberal Party, the Quebec Liberal Party, is in favor of balanced budgets when the economy is good, is going well. If it's obvious that if you want to go back to a balanced budget, you need to make cuts or increase taxes, and we're not in favor of increasing taxes in Quebec, which is already the most taxed jurisdiction in North America. So we need to make cuts, but we need to make them intelligently, to make the right choices, to explain those choices to Quebecers, and to make sure that they're on board, that they understand, right? So that's what part of the challenge, I think, that Mr. Rodriguez has. I mean, he will certainly promise a balanced budget, because that's always what we've said in the last few years, but he has to explain how he will achieve it, and that's a challenge.
How do other provinces do it? How does Ontario do it?
Well, many other provinces are in difficult
but not like
situations, but not like this. And we know why we're in this difficult situation. Again, it's because there was too much money going to the government. We're taxed we're very much taxed, both at the personal level, in the individual level, and at the company level. So our taxes are too high, which is not good for the economy, and our expenditures are much too high also. And furthermore, which makes this even more difficult for people, is that our public services, whether it's healthcare, education, many other departments, are not delivering. So, we in Quebec, we had some sort of social compact where we would agree to pay a bit higher taxes than elsewhere, but we would have more generous, more efficient services. And now we're having the worst of both worlds, right? We are taxed very heavily, and the services are not there, or not there at the level they should be.
But beyond even services, if you look at this, not as a critique of the government, but the reality is, look at some of the investments, the hundreds of millions, billions of dollars that have just not panned out, from Northvolt to Lion. You know, we're spending $800 million or almost $1 billion possibly by the time we're done on a roof for the Olympic Stadium. These are things people will look at and go, wait a sec, if we hadn't spent that money, if these investments had been better investments, we wouldn't be in this place.
So that's part of our difficulty. I think in Quebec since the 1960s, we've had a government that is very much involved in choices that should be private sector choices, right? Government needs to be there to regulate the economy, because we know that left on its own, the capitalist system will produce inequalities, inefficiencies, pollution, and so on. So we need the government to play a regulating role. But we don't need a government that decides what company will succeed and which will fail, because they're very bad at it. Right? I mean, that's the reality.
Record, yeah.
The track record is terrible, not only in Quebec, in other jurisdictions also. The government should not decide which initiative, private sector initiative, deserves to be supported and which do not, because oftentimes it leads to mistakes like
Northvolt.
or Lion Electric, which is
Right.
another. I mean, Lion Electric is an interesting case because it's obviously a company that was poorly managed, but that was supported by the government and probably would have failed earlier if it had been left only to the private sector, right? And Northvolt was a startup that was, got politicians here in Quebec and in other jurisdictions very excited, but it was still a startup. So is it worth investing hundreds of millions of public money into a startup? It's very risky, and those kinds of risks should be left to the private sector.
You know, the one other thing, and this comes up repeatedly, not just provincially, but of course municipally as well, is the size of government.
Yes.
You know, governments get in and say, well, we're going to cut this, cut that, and what they end up doing is hiring more and more public servants. It's happened here, it's happened in Quebec. How does that begin to change? Because it seems to me if you have to cut, that'd be one place you could cut.
I think you need a discipline, and the discipline begins with the necessity or the goal, the target, to have a balanced budget when the economy is running well. And when you remember in 2015 when Justin Trudeau was campaigning and he came out and said we'll have a small deficit for 2 years to pay for infrastructure so that the economy starts up again. And I remember very well where I was when I heard that. And I thought, I said to myself, this is opening the door to trouble. Because once you abandon the idea of a balanced budget, there's no discipline anymore. And that's exactly what happened. And with the pandemic came an excuse to spend even more money.
Right.
So that both in Quebec City and in Ottawa, they hired, thousands of new public servants. For what? I mean, are things going better now in hospitals, in schools, in other government departments? The answer is no. The governments have started new programs, new initiatives that cost a lot of money, but that do not respond to the concrete needs of Quebecers or Canadians. So that's the lack of discipline. That's why I believe strongly that you need to focus on the idea of having a balanced budget when the economy goes well. The same as a family, when both parents have a job, should seek to have as little debt as possible. Because when bad days come, if you're way down in debt, you're in deep trouble. Or if interest rates go up. We're very lucky that interest rates have been relatively low, because if interest rates go up, both in Ottawa and in Quebec City, I mean, the dire straits in which we're in will be even worse.
And throw in tariffs on top of everything else, and it's making it real messy.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
I mean, how do you propose that we get out of this conundrum? We're in real mess here in terms of. But we have resources, which is what I don't understand, like hydroelectric power. I mean, certainly minerals, aluminum, all these things. And yet we find ourselves like in a rabbit hole here, kind of.
Well, we do have abundant resources, but for instance, hydro. I mean, we pay hydro very low rates, and it's certainly very far from the market rate. So we have those resources. But we use them not to pay for services. We use them to encourage people to waste the energy, really, because the tariffs are so low. But tried to have, as a political party, try to say that you'll increase hydro rates.
Ça de la visite.
And the reasoning is interesting because what people say is this is our energy, therefore we should have it for very low price.
Right.
But that's not the logic. When you have natural resources in abundance, you need to use them as a leverage for other things, not to pay for people so that they can waste the energy because it doesn't cost anything. It doesn't make much sense. Norway has very important oil resources, and Norwegians don't pay preferential rates for their oil, and they use oil to to have this sovereign fund that is used for other things. And Norway is a very wealthy country. We're not, because we don't use our. I mean, we know that there's oil and gas, in Quebec. We've decided not to exploit it at all. It's not a matter of limiting it for the sake of the environment. We've decided, even without knowing exactly what is there, we've decided that we won't exploit those resources at all. So what's the use in being wealthy in resources if you don't use them, if you don't exploit them?
You mentioned Mark Carney earlier on. I just wanted to come back to, talking about the change from a Justin Trudeau into the Mark Carney. And obviously the catalyst there, I think most people would agree, is Donald Trump.
Yes.
And the threat he posed in tariffs and about annexing Canada and everything else. What's that catalyst going to be for a Quebec provincial election next year? Does there have to be a catalyst like that for change, or is it simply a matter of the CAQ and a lot of poor decisions, a lot of bad investments? That's a reason to get rid of that government. But then the question becomes, so who's the government we put in its place?
Yeah, and so my impression is that the same catalyst should have this impact. I mean, Donald Trump will be there next year. He will continue to govern as he does, and it's still a threat for Canada as a whole, and certainly for Quebec. And the same way that Canada, under Mark Carney, appears to be taking the tough decisions to change the Canadian economy, diversify our trade, and so on, I think Quebec society needs to make those kinds of decisions so that Quebec is not as dependent on the American market, leverages the Canadian market. This is really striking. I mean, exports from Quebec to other provinces are very important, but they're not as important as our exports to the U.S. Well, I mean, this is a 32 million people market that is there for us. Free trade or quasi-free trade with other provinces. We should leverage that. We should leverage our ties to Europe. We should look closer to Asia, which for many people in Quebec, business people makes them a bit afraid because these are complex markets. But this is nearly 3 billion people as a market, India and China together. So we need to make those changes, and we need a government that has this kind of strategy, not that gets involved in every investment initiative, but that has an overall strategy to help businesses that want to make those decisions, want to take those risks. Right now, we're not in that at all. Right? We're sort of ignoring a little bit. There are many people in Quebec who are angry at Donald Trump, right? But when it comes to deciding how Quebec will adapt to this new context, we're still, and I'm sorry to come back to this, but we're still in a situation where we might have to vote again on separation. I mean, a separate Quebec in the present context would be clearly a much weaker Quebec, right?
So what do you see happening then next election?
Well, my hope is that we have, a liberal government, but not under any circumstance. I mean, I really hope that the Liberal Party will propose a new direction for Quebec's economy, for public services, will be frank with Quebecers as to the seriousness of the situation that we're in, and that proposes a plan so that we are able as a society to adapt to this new context. We would make a terrible mistake if we thought that once Donald Trump is gone in 4 years or 3 years and a half, the problem will be solved. There's obviously a very strong current in the U.S. that shares Mr. Trump's ideas, and once Mr. Trump is gone, somewhere else will be there to carry those ideas, right? And so the challenge for us, for Canada and Quebec, is to make the changes so that we're not as dependent as we are on the U.S. as a market.
And do you think that Mr. Rodriguez and his team are taking heed of all of this?
I think so. I mean, Mr. Rodriguez comes from the federal government.
Right.
He's well aware of the changes that are being made currently in Ottawa. He says he's aiming for a balanced budget, so he knows how difficult that will be. I mean, we've talked about during the campaign, the Liberal leadership campaign, there were 6 debates. Many of those debates touched upon those topics, Donald Trump and the necessity to diversify our trade partners and so on. And all the candidates, frankly, were in favor of making those kinds of changes. So we'll see what happens. I mean, we still have a year and a half or a year and a quarter to go. Mr. Rodriguez will travel across the province to meet Quebecers. He will hear what their concerns are, and I'm confident that they will have a platform that prepares those kinds of changes, prepares Quebec for the necessary changes.
With respect, though, as we get set to wrap up, much is always made of the fact that to win this next election, any election, it's about regions.
Yeah.
And the regions have abandoned the provincial Liberal Party. That's obviously the big get. Are you seeing anything? I mean, clearly that's something they realize. That's not news to anybody. But how do you actually go ahead and effect that?
Yeah, so when I started with the Quebec Liberal Party 2 years ago, we traveled across the province, and there were barely anyone in the rooms that were right. We invited people, not only members of the party, but anyone to come and meet us and discuss with the future of the Liberal Party of Quebec, and there were practically no one in the rooms. We did another tour of the province a couple of months ago. There were many people in the room. So I'm confident that things are changing. People are looking for an alternative. People who voted for the Liberal Party in the past and had quit the party for whatever reason are coming back because they realize that we need an alternative to this government, and we also need an alternative to a party that wants to have a referendum on separation. So I'm confident. I mean, many regions of Quebec were once strongholds for the Liberal Party of Quebec, so there are many people who voted Liberal in the past, are not allergic to voting Liberal. I just think we have to convince them that we're serious, that we have a good team, especially on the economy, and that we're proposing changes that will make Quebec a more productive, prosperous, and efficient society.
I'm curious, when I hear you say that, I think to myself, you after an election, you do a post-mortem, you try to understand what happened, why it happened. Why do you think those regions abandoned the Liberal Party to begin with?
I think there were many different reasons, but 2 of the reasons. Number one, the CAQ was very popular after the pandemic, right? And the thing that we heard the most during the door-to-door knocking and so on was, well, they deserve a chance. They did well during the pandemic, and it was not an ordinary mandate. We should give them a chance to have a real normal mandate, especially Mr. Legault personally. That obviously has changed a lot in recent months, and people are looking for an alternative. The other thing is, the Liberals were in power 15 years. As any government that has been in power for a long time, there are many people who are unhappy. Yeah. And I think people were thinking that the Liberals had not done the kind of exercise that you're talking about. Being defeated, what does it mean? Where did we go wrong? What should we change? This is something that the Liberal Party failed to do, I think, after 2018, and has done now after the defeat in 2022. We went through a very serious, rigorous exercise, post-mortem exercise, and we looked at where we failed, what we got wrong, and we corrected these things. Now I think we're ready.
All right.
Do you think, one question, Mr. Duhem, a lot of people think that might be a force coming out of nowhere in terms of making a huge difference, certainly in Quebec City, but in the regions as well. Do you see that as any kind of likelihood, or?
Well, I mean, he represents certainly a current of ideas that is popular amongst some Quebecers. I think he will remain somewhat of at the margin, but it's important that those ideas get heard, and that's why I personally wish that Mr. Duhem, whether in Arthabasca or somewhere else, eventually gets in the National Assembly, because it's important that people feel that those people feel that they're represented in the National Assembly. Now, my impression is that it will remain marginal, that people are looking. Quebecers are moderate. They're more extreme center, and that fits with, I think, the Liberal Party platform.
Well, the prevailing philosophy amongst many is that people are parking their votes with the PQ for now, waiting for something to happen somewhere.
Yeah, but there's a risk, and that's where I see the risk, is that I think if people do not see, when they're looking at all the parties, they don't see an alternative that they like, they might decide to vote PQ because they like Mr. Plamondon, he looks reasonable, and so he's young. And you know, think, well, if he does hold that referendum, we'll vote against it. But if you look at Brexit, right, when David Cameron decided to have a referendum on Brexit, he was absolutely convinced that he would win it. And that's what polls showed, that Brexit would lose. And in the end, what happened? Brexit won, and the UK has been suffering since then.
Yeah.
So once you start a referendum campaign, the campaign takes a dynamic in itself, and you can't control it. That's what happened in 1995, and that could very well happen if Quebecers decide to, you know, take a chance with Plamondon and see what happens.
We are out of time. I want to thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
being with us today,
Thanks for
André
having
Pratte.
me.
Merci.
Merci
Thank you.
beaucoup.
That wraps up another edition of the Corner Booth Podcast. We'll see you again soon.